It is approximately 2 in the morning on Saturday, the 25th of May, 1996. The town is San Luis Obispo, California. The campus is California Polytechnic State University, where summer is 2 days from beginning and where a small Friday night birthday party at an off-campus house has just ended. 3 young people are walking back to the campus dormitories from the party. 2 of them are women. The third is a man. The first woman is Kristin Smart. She is 19 years old. She is a freshman. She is 6 feet 1 inch tall. She is from Stockton, California. She has been studying architecture and engineering. She is, by the account of every classmate, a confident, athletic, friendly, distinctive presence on a campus where it is hard to be distinctive. The second woman is Cheryl Anderson, also a freshman, also 19, from a different residence hall. She has been at the party as a friend of friends. She is walking home along the same general route as Kristin. The man is Paul Ruben Flores, 19, also a freshman, a fellow Cal Poly student, the resident of a different dormitory across campus. He has been at the same party. He has offered to walk Kristin home. The 3 of them leave the party together. They walk approximately 5 blocks. At a particular intersection, Cheryl turns off toward her own residence hall. Kristin and Paul continue together. Cheryl turns, looks back, sees the 2 of them, Kristin and Paul, walking on. Kristin is on her left side. Paul is on her right. That look back by Cheryl Anderson on the morning of the 25th of May, 1996, is the last documented sighting of Kristin Smart. 26 years later, on a Tuesday in October of 2022, in a courtroom in Monterey County, California, a jury will convict Paul Ruben Flores of the murder of Kristin Smart. The evidence at trial will rest, in significant part, on the reconciliation of 2 witness accounts. The first account is Cheryl Anderson's account of what she saw at the corner. The second account is the account of a former housemate of Paul Flores, who heard, decades earlier, things that he had been afraid to say aloud, and who came forward, finally, when the case was reopened. This is the case of Kristin Smart. This is the story of 2 witnesses, 26 years apart, whose accounts, when reconciled, broke the silence that had protected her killer for a generation. Kristin Smart was born on the 20th of February, 1977. She grew up in Stockton, California, in the Central Valley. Her father is Stan Smart. Her mother is Denise Smart. She had a younger brother named Matthew. She had a younger sister named Lindsay. Kristin was, by the standards of any high school, an athlete. She had played volleyball, basketball, and softball at Lincoln High School in Stockton. She had been, in her senior year, a varsity captain in 2 of those sports. She had been, by most accounts, the kind of high schooler who knew everyone in the building. She had chosen Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for college because she had wanted to be on the Central Coast, because she had wanted to study architecture and engineering, and because she had wanted, friends said, to live somewhere that did not feel like the Central Valley. She had moved into Muir Hall in the fall of 1995. She had finished her freshman year academically without issue. She was 13 days from going home for the summer. The party Kristin attended that night was at a house in San Luis Obispo, off campus, at 135 Crandall Way. The house was rented by Cal Poly students. The party was not, formally, a fraternity event. It has been described variously in subsequent reporting as a birthday party, an end-of-year party, and a casual house party. Kristin had arrived at the party in the late evening. She had been with several friends from her dorm. She had, by accounts of multiple party guests, consumed alcohol over the course of the evening. She had, at some point in the late hours, decided to leave. It was at this point that the 2-witness structure of this case begins. Cheryl Anderson, who was leaving at approximately the same time, agreed to walk back with Kristin in the general direction of campus. Tim Davis, another freshman, walked with them as well for the first several blocks. Paul Flores, who had been at the party and who had spoken to Kristin during the evening, also joined the walk back. The 4 of them, Kristin and Cheryl and Tim and Paul, walked together for approximately 3 blocks. Tim Davis split off first. He turned at an intersection and continued toward his own residence. He waved goodnight. The remaining three, Kristin and Cheryl and Paul, continued. Cheryl Anderson's testimony, given in the Paul Flores trial in 2022, established the moment of the corner. The corner was approximately 2 blocks from her own residence hall. At the corner, Cheryl turned away from Kristin and Paul. She continued toward her dorm. She walked alone for approximately 20 steps. She turned around. She saw Kristin. She saw Paul. They were approximately 20 feet behind her, still walking together, in the direction of Kristin's residence hall, which was Muir Hall, on the south side of the campus core. Cheryl turned forward and continued walking. She arrived at her own dorm. She went inside. She slept. The look back was the moment. The look back was, in retrospect, the last documented sighting of Kristin Denise Smart. Cheryl Anderson did not, in 1996, understand that. She would understand it the next afternoon when Kristin was reported missing. She would understand it more clearly in the months that followed. She would carry the weight of it for the rest of her life. The cliffhanger that closes Part 1 is the cost that Cheryl Anderson paid for being the last witness. In the years that followed, Cheryl was interviewed dozens of times by investigators. She was deposed. She was asked the same questions over and over. She was, in the public coverage of the case, the witness who had been there. She did not, by the family's account in subsequent interviews, ever feel that she had done anything wrong. She had, at the corner, made the entirely reasonable decision to walk to her own dorm. She had been a freshman. She had been tired. She had not had any reason, at that corner, to think that the decision would matter. The reason it would matter would come from a second witness, 26 years later, whose name had not yet entered the case in 1996. Paul Ruben Flores was, in 1996, also a freshman at Cal Poly. He lived in a dormitory across campus from Kristin's Muir Hall, in a residence called Santa Lucia Hall. He was, by physical description in the trial record, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, of medium build, dark-haired. He shared a dormitory hallway with several other male students. In the early afternoon of the 25th of May, 1996, when Cheryl Anderson and others began to realize that Kristin had not returned to her own residence hall, the question of who had last seen Kristin moved quickly through the network of the freshman class. Within hours, Paul Flores had been identified as the man who had walked her home. By the next day, Paul Flores had been interviewed by Cal Poly campus security. He stated that he had walked Kristin to within sight of her own dormitory, and had then turned away and gone to his own dormitory. That account, Paul Flores's account, was the account he would maintain, with variations, for the next 25 years. The account would never quite match the version of events that several of his fellow Santa Lucia Hall residents would, in private and over many years, eventually come to share with investigators. The witness whose testimony, 2.5 decades later, would reconcile against Cheryl Anderson's account was a former Santa Lucia Hall resident named Derek T.S.A. T.S.A. had lived on Paul Flores's dormitory floor in 1996. T.S.E. had been interviewed early in the original investigation. T.S.E. had said, in 1996, what most freshmen said when interviewed about a vanished classmate they had only loosely known. He had said he had heard nothing. He had said he had no information. What T would eventually testify, in 2022, was a version of that account that had been refined over 26 years of remembering. He had heard, on the morning of the 25th of May, 1996, sounds from Paul Flores's room that were inconsistent with a freshman returning alone from a party. He had heard a thud. He had heard, by his account, what he believed at the time to be a struggle. He had not, in 1996, known what to do with this. He had been 17 years old. He had been afraid. Other witnesses came forward in the years between the original investigation and the conviction. A former Cal Poly female student named Susan Aluoto testified that, in a biology class assignment during the 1996 fall term, Paul Flores had made statements to her that, paraphrased here so as to honor witness privacy, she interpreted as the statements of a person who was unsettled by his own knowledge of what had happened to Kristin Smart. A former girlfriend of Paul Flores's testified about prior conduct. A former housemate testified about excavation he had observed at Paul's family home in Arroyo Grande in the months following the disappearance. The accumulation of these accounts, over 26 years, is what made the reconciliation possible. Cheryl Anderson's account established that Kristin had been alive at the corner with Paul. The dormitory witnesses established that Paul's account of walking Kristin home had been false. The reconciliation produced, in the courtroom, the legal structure of guilt. The reopening of the case, in operational terms, was the work of a podcast. Christopher Lambert, a musician and former wedding DJ entrepreneur from Orcutt, California, began producing a podcast called In Your Own Backyard in 2019. The podcast was a long-form, multi-episode, methodically reported reinvestigation of the Kristin Smart case. Lambert was not a credentialed journalist or a former law enforcement officer. He was a private citizen who had moved to the Central Coast, who had become aware of the cold case through casual local conversation, and who had decided, with no formal training, to apply to the case the long-form audio reporting techniques he had heard on other true crime productions. What the podcast did over its first season was to organize, publicly and in audio format, the existing public record of the case in a way that surfaced previously dormant tensions. Witnesses who had been silent for 20 years began to come forward, in part because the podcast made them aware that other witnesses had also been silent. The cumulative public attention that the podcast generated produced, by the end of 2019, a reopening of formal law enforcement interest in the case under the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department. Search warrants were executed at Paul Flores's family residence in Arroyo Grande in 2020. Forensic findings, including soil analysis consistent with disturbed earth and trace biological material, were developed. In April of 2021, Paul Flores was arrested. His father, Ruben Flores, was arrested on accessory charges related to alleged disposal of remains. The cliffhanger that closes Part 2 is the second witness, and the first witness, 26 years apart, finally placed in the same courtroom. Cheryl Anderson took the stand and testified to the coroner. The dormitory witnesses took the stand and testified to the morning. The two accounts, which had not been able to be reconciled in 1996, because the second account had not yet been spoken aloud, were now reconciled in front of a jury. The reconciliation was the case. The trial of Paul Flores began in July of 2022 in the Monterey County Superior Court, where the venue had been moved for impartiality reasons. The trial of his father, Ruben Flores, on the accessory charges, was held simultaneously, with separate juries, before the same judge. The state's case rested on the witness reconciliations, the soil analysis from the Arroyo Grande residence, the trace evidence, the digital forensic review of pager and pre-cellular communication records, and the cumulative public record statements that Paul Flores had made over the previous 26 years, which had varied in ways that the prosecution argued were inconsistent with truthful repetition. The defense argued that the case was fundamentally a no-body homicide, that the evidence was circumstantial, that the witness testimony from 26 years prior was unreliable due to time and to the inevitable contamination of memory by media coverage, and that the soil analysis was insufficient to establish that Kristin had been buried at the Arroyo Grande residence and subsequently relocated. The Paul Flores jury deliberated for approximately 7 days. On the 18th of October, 2022, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on first-degree murder. The Ruben Flores jury, which had heard separate evidence on the accessory charges, returned, on the same day, a verdict of not guilty. The convictions, taken together, produced the legal closure of the Kristin Smart case. The body of Kristin Smart has never been recovered. The conviction, in California, of a no-body first-degree murder is rare. The Smart case is now one of the most cited California precedents for what such a prosecution can accomplish 26 years after a disappearance. Paul Flores was sentenced in March of 2023 to 25 years to life in California State Prison. He was 46 years old at sentencing. He was transported to the California Department of Corrections. He has been in custody since. The Smart family attended the sentencing. Stan Smart, Kristin's father, addressed the court. Denise Smart, Kristin's mother, addressed the court. Lindsay Smart, Kristin's younger sister, addressed the court. The statements paraphrased here ask the court to recognize that the loss of Kristin had taken nearly 3 decades of the family's lives, that the family had aged into and beyond the years that Kristin should have been with them, and that the conviction, while welcome, did not return the body or the time. The recovery of Kristin's remains has been, in the years since the conviction, the unfinished work of the case. The Smart family has continued to advocate for ongoing search efforts in the Central Coast and Central Valley regions of California. The San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department has indicated that the search remains active. The Cal Poly campus has, in the years since the case, established a memorial for Kristin. The architecture department, in which Kristin had been studying, has named a student award in her memory. The freshman residence halls have implemented walk-home programs that did not exist in 1996. The cliffhanger that closes Part 3 is what the case has not yet provided. The conviction is real. The sentencing is real. The body is not. The Smart family, in the years since the conviction, has continued to wait for the recovery. The wait may continue for the rest of the family's lives. The wait, however, is no longer the weight of a family who does not know what happened. It is the weight of a family who knows. Knowing is, in the small available margin, the difference. The Kristin Smart case is, above all else, the case where 2 witnesses, separated by 26 years, gave the country the structure of how a no-body homicide can be prosecuted on the strength of a reconciled set of human accounts. Cheryl Anderson, at the corner, did what witnesses do. She saw what she saw. She told what she had seen. She did not, in 1996, have the second witness who could complete her account. She carried the incompleteness. She kept telling the truth, the same truth, every time she was asked. The dormitory witnesses, at the other end of the 26 years, did what witnesses sometimes do. They held what they had heard. They held it, in some cases, because they had been 17 and had not known what to do. They held it, in other cases, because the social cost of speaking in 1996 had been higher than the social cost of staying quiet. They held it, in some cases, until the public surface of the case was such that they could finally say it without paying that cost. What the case asks of a generation watching this video is the lesson that the dormitory witnesses learned slowly, over 26 years. The witnesses learned that silence does not protect anyone. The witnesses learned that the cost of speaking, when it is genuinely paid, is paid by the person who waits for the speaking. Kristin's family waited. Kristin's sister waited. Cheryl Anderson, the witness who had spoken in 1996, waited. The generation watching this video lives in a world where, if the dormitory witnesses were freshmen now, the social cost of speaking would be lower. The platforms exist. The reporting tools exist. The campus reporting structures exist. The adult world has, in incremental ways, made room for what it had not made room for in 1996. The lesson is to use the room, to call what is heard, to document what is heard, to not become, by silence, the witness who had to be persuaded 26 years later to say what could have been said the morning after. Kristin Smart was 19 years old. She was 6 feet 1 inch tall. She was a freshman at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She was studying architecture. She was 13 days from going home for the summer. She was loved. If you have a case you want covered on this channel, the email is in the description. The next episode of Last Known Frame drops on Friday. It is the case of a young woman in a fishing town in South Carolina in the early hours of a February morning in 2019, and the boat crash that opened the door to the most documented family criminal saga in modern American legal history.